At December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m. approaching Pearl Harbor. The Pacific wind was quiet. Too quiet. A lone Douglas SBD Dauntless cut through the sky, its engine trembling after hours above open ocean. Below, the horizon glowed red. The pilot leaned for war and froze. Pearl Harbor was burning. Columns of smoke twisted upward like dark pillars. Battleships lay wounded, listing in the water. Explosions flickered across Ford Island like lightning trapped on the ground. The rising sun bathed the harbor in a blinding orange glow. Over the radio, a shaken voice broke through static. "This is Enterprise scout plane. Pearl Harbor is under attack. Repeat, Pearl Harbor is under attack." The pilot banked sharply, searching for a place to land. But Japanese aircraft roared past him, streaking toward Oahu like black arrows. At sea, still 200 miles from Hawaii, the great carrier USS Enterprise, CV-6, steamed forward, unaware she was moments away from entering the deadliest day in American naval history. Her decks were slick with salt spray. Her crew, tired, hungry, unarmored, looked out over the waves in stunned silence as the radio message repeated. America was at war. The Enterprise was still hours away. But fate had just forged her into the sharpest spear of the Pacific. On the morning the world changed, one ship was still moving toward the fire, not away from it. Before we continue, take a moment to honor these stories. Like this video, subscribe, and stay with us because what you're about to witness is not just history. It is the story of the most decorated U.S. warship of World War II, a ship the enemy called the Ghost. To understand why the USS Enterprise became a legend, we must step back. At late 1941, Europe was in ruins. The Axis forces controlled vast territories. Japan's empire was expanding like a rising tide across Asia and the Pacific. The United States, unprepared, divided, uncertain, still believed war might be avoided. But in the Pacific, American carriers stood alone as the only true line of defense. Among them was a new, fast, powerful vessel launched in 1936, USS Enterprise, CV-6, a Yorktown-class carrier 824 feet long, capable of launching dozens of aircraft into battle. A floating airfield built not for defense, but for striking deep. Yet by December 1941, she had never fired her weapons in anger. The Enterprise had been tasked with delivering fighter aircraft to Wake Island, one of the last American outposts before the vast empty Pacific. Her crew expected routine duty, training flights, drills, quiet nights under the stars. None of them knew they were about to sail into the opening act of a global catastrophe. The stakes become clear. As Enterprise approached Oahu on December 7th, Japanese forces unleashed 353 aircraft, 6 carriers, 2 attack waves. The United States Pacific Fleet, battleships, destroyers, aircraft, fuel depots, suddenly hung in the balance. The fate of the Pacific now rested not on battleship, but on the carriers still at sea. And one of the Enterprise was rushing straight toward the inferno. Hours after the first radio call, Enterprise launched her own aircraft to defend Pearl Harbor. But the skies were chaos of smoke, tracer fire, and explosions. Some friendly planes shot down by mistake. Enterprise pilots arriving late, alone, were thrown into a battlefield they had never imagined. Some were mistaken for Japanese and killed by friendly fire. Others dove into combat with empty fuel tanks, risking the ocean rather than abandon Oahu. The carrier itself continued toward Hawaii, full speed. Every man on board knew, if Japanese carriers were still nearby, Enterprise could be the next target. The sun dipped behind the horizon as Enterprise approached Pearl Harbor. The crew gathered at the rails. In the distance, the harbor glowed orange, the glow of an entire fleet burning. Men clenched their fists, others whispered prayers. Some simply stared, stunned, unable to speak. Enterprise entered the harbor the next morning. What her crew found would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Battleships overturned, smoke still rising from the Arizona. Oil-slicked water stretching across the harbor like a dark mirror of death. Admiral William F. Halsey, commanding Enterprise, stepped ashore and saw the devastation. He turned to his officers. His voice was calm but filled with iron. Now the war starts. Enterprise became the spearhead of America's response. Within days, her aircraft hunted Japanese submarines. Her task force patrolled the Hawaiian waters. Her crews worked around the clock, preparing for a fight none of them had trained for. And then a daring idea emerged, an idea so risky, so improbable that it bordered on madness. A plan that would push American aviation farther than ever before and bring the war to Japan's doorstep. The plan that would make history, the Doolittle raid. Enterprise was chosen as the escort carrier, the shield for the bombers. But that historic moment was still months away, for now Enterprise's legend was only beginning. As 1942 dawned over a wounded Pacific, the world's most indestructible warship prepared to enter the crucible. A series of battles that would decide the fate of nations. In the opening months of 1942, America was bruised, grieving, and dangerously exposed. Japan had seized Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Carrier warfare, the new and untested weapon of the Pacific, would decide what survived. The United States had 3 operational carriers in the Pacific: the USS Enterprise, the USS Lexington, and the USS Yorktown. They were outnumbered, outranged, outtrained, and facing a Japanese fleet that had been preparing for war for a decade. Yet even in those darkest weeks, one ship began to carve her name into history. The USS Enterprise, the ship that refused to break. Enterprise strikes back Marshall and Gilbert Islands raid. By February 1, 1942, the Pacific calm was shattered by the roar of Enterprise's aircraft thundering off her deck. The SBD Dauntless dive bombers, the TBD Devastator torpedo planes, and the Wildcat fighters. The United States was hitting back, for the first time since Pearl Harbor. Enterprise pilots punched deep into Japanese-held islands. Explosions rippled across airfields, fuel tanks erupted, and ships in harbors burst into flame. It wasn't a decisive blow, but it was something far more valuable. Proof that Japan could bleed. Proof that the U.S. Navy was still alive. A new psychological weapon. In Tokyo, Japanese commanders took notice. Enterprise had slipped through their patrols, struck fast, and vanished. They gave her a new name, the Gray Ghost, because every time they thought she had been sunk, she returned. The Doolittle raid. Enterprise stands guard. At April 1942, a sight no man expected. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, Army bombers, lined up across the deck of the USS Hornet. Aircraft far too large for a carrier. Aircraft that had never been launched from a moving deck. Enterprise's job was to protect them. Admiral Halsey, aboard Enterprise, led the task force. The mission: fly these bombers off the deck and strike Tokyo, the heart of the empire. Land in China and don't come back. It was a mission bordering on impossible. But in desperation, courage grows. And on April 18, 1942, under dark skies and high seas, Enterprise watched as every bomber lifted off the Hornet's deck, one by one, and disappeared into the storm. Hours later, Tokyo shook. The psychological impact was enormous. Japan now understood that American carriers were coming for them. And among those carriers, one name kept returning in reports: USS Enterprise. The race toward the Coral Sea. After the Doolittle raid, Japan moved south toward Australia, a direct threat to American allies. The Coral Sea became the next battleground. Enterprise was ordered to join the fight, but fate intervened. Enterprise arrives too late. By the time Enterprise reached the area, the battle had already raged. USS Lexington sunk. USS Yorktown badly damaged. Japan's carrier Shoho sunk. Japan's carrier Shokaku heavily damaged. The first carrier versus carrier battle in history had changed everything. Aircraft, not guns, now decided wars. Enterprise's crew understood what was coming. Their own test. Their own crucible. A battle far larger than Coral Sea. Japan sets the trap. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto crafted a massive operation to eliminate the U.S. carriers once and for all. The target, Midway Atoll. His plan was precise, bold, even elegant. But Japan did not know two critical facts. 1. American codebreakers had cracked JN-25, Japan's naval cipher. 2. The Americans knew the attack was coming. 3. And the Americans would be waiting. At the center of their ambush, the USS Enterprise, flagship of Task Force 16. By May 28, 1942, Enterprise sailed from Pearl Harbor under gray clouds. Her flight deck loaded with every available aircraft. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and Wildcat fighters. Her crew felt the weight of history on their shoulders. Many were barely 20 years old. Some had never seen combat. Others still carried memories of Pearl Harbor burned into their minds. American intel reveals the truth. In a small room in Pearl Harbor, codebreakers confirmed beyond all doubt. Japan was coming for Midway, for carriers, veteran pilots. More aircraft than the U.S. could match. But the Americans had something Japan didn't, Enterprise, and they had the element of surprise. As Enterprise approached Midway, the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. The crew felt it, the silence before the storm. Mechanics worked through the night. Pilots studied maps, gunners cleaned their weapons. Chaplain Stafford led quiet prayers in the hangar bay. Then on June 3rd, a message crackled over the radio. Enemy sighted. Many planes heading Midway. The Battle of Midway, the turning point of the Pacific War, was about to begin. And USS Enterprise would carry the hopes of an entire nation on her steel deck. By June 4, 1942, 4:30 a.m. Midway Atoll. The sky was still black. Waves slapped gently against Enterprise's hull. The carrier moved silently, cutting through the dark like a steel ghost. Then at 5:52 a.m. it came. Many enemy planes heading Midway. This is no drill. Red lights flashed across the ship. Klaxons wailed. Men leapt from bunks, boots half-tied, adrenaline surging. Above the Pacific, Japan's first wave swept toward Midway, over 100 aircraft. Enterprise's men rushed to stations as the flight deck crew sprinted into position. On the bridge, Admiral Raymond Spruance watched the eastern horizon turn pale. He knew what the next hours would decide. The world's best carrier fleet was coming. Japan's pride, for carriers, experienced pilots. Nearly 250 aircraft. And only 3 American carriers stood in their way. Among them, at the heart of Task Force 16, was USS Enterprise. The ship that would carry the weight of this moment and alter history. At 7:06 a.m., the call came from a PBY flying boat. Coordinates flashed across the map. For carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Enterprise's crew held their breath. The Japanese fleet was exactly where U.S. codebreakers had predicted. Admiral Spruance issued the order. Launch attack immediately. There was no time for perfect formations. No time for careful planning. Every minute of delay meant more American lives lost. The flight deck thundered to life. SBD Dauntless dive bombers rolled forward. TBD Devastator torpedo planes were fueled and armed. Wildcats roared, engines shaking the deck. Enterprise's Air Group 6, pilots barely out of their teens, prepared for the most important mission of their lives. This was the moment Enterprise had been built for, the reason her crew had trained in rain, wind, and darkness. At 7:28 a.m., the first dive bomber launched, then another. The air above Enterprise swirled with wings and vapor trails as the attack group formed over the open ocean. Bombers climbing, fighters circling, torpedo planes struggling to keep position. One by one, they turned east toward the enemy. Enterprise's torpedo squadron, VT-6, flew low over the waves. Underarmed, outdated, easy targets. Yet every man in those devastators knew their role. Draw Japanese fighters down. Force enemy carriers to turn into the wind. Create chaos, then attacked bravely. But the Japanese Zero fighters descended like a storm. Machine guns ripped through wings and fuselages. Fuel ignited. Engines caught fire. One after another, devastators splashed into the ocean. Pilot Ensign Osmus crashed into the water, crawled from his sinking plane, and was taken prisoner. He would be killed hours later. Others never surfaced at all. Of Enterprise's torpedo planes, nearly all were destroyed. Almost every crewman died. But their sacrifice would buy the seconds needed for victory. Enterprise's dive bombers approached from high altitude. so high that the pilots could see the immense Japanese fleet spread across the blue Pacific. But they were lost. Clouds blocked their view and fuel was running low. Their commander, Wade McCluskey, spotted a lone Japanese ship speeding through the waves, the destroyer Arisher, racing to rejoin its fleet after chasing a submarine. McCluskey made a decision that would alter history. He followed Arashi's wake. Minutes later, the ocean opened beneath them, for Japanese carriers came into view. And as if fate had aligned the heavens, their decks were crowded. Aircraft refueling, bombs lying exposed, torpedoes waiting to be loaded. Fuel hoses stretched across the wooden decks like veins. The perfect moment. A moment that would never come again. Enterprise's dive bombers rolled into their dives. At 10:22 a.m., the sky split open. SBD Dauntless dive bombers screamed downward at 240 knots. Wind tore at their wings. The ocean spun wildly below. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading Enterprise's formations, focused on the carrier Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship. Bomb doors opened. A heartbeat of silence. Then impact. A single 1,000-pound bomb slammed through Akagi's flight deck. It detonated among fuel hoses and torpedoes. Akagi erupted in a fireball. Moments later, Kaga, hit by Enterprise dive bombers, was engulfed in flames. Fuel ignited. A chain reaction tore the ship apart. Soryu, struck by Yorktown's dive bombers, exploded in towering pillars of fire. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning. The pride of the Imperial Navy, shattered by a handful of American pilots. The tide of the Pacific had turned, not by luck, but by courage, and by the steel deck of the USS Enterprise. But one carrier remained, Hiryu, and she was coming for revenge. June 4, 1942, midday. The Japanese carrier Hiryu, the last surviving flagship, launched a wave of aircraft toward the crippled U.S. carriers. Enterprise's decks roared to life. Pilots scrambled into Wildcats. Bombs and torpedoes were readied. Gunners braced, fingers trembling over triggers. The enemy was relentless. Every minute of delay could mean death for hundreds. Enterprise's steel decks became a fortress of hope against the storm of Japanese fire. Wildcats climbed to intercept. Dauntless dive bombers circled, waiting for orders. The air smelled of smoke, oil, and tension. Machine gun tracers stitched through the sky like lightning. Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McCluskey led the dive bombers on a precision attack, following the same daring tactics that destroyed the other 3 carriers. Bombs fell with precision. Fire consumed Hiryu's deck. Explosions ignited fuel stores. The carrier buckled and began to sink. By evening, the Japanese carrier force was annihilated. 4 carriers destroyed in a single day. Enterprise had helped deliver a blow from which the Imperial Navy would never fully recover. The Pacific had changed. The ghostly ship had struck again. The legend of the Gray Ghost was cemented. Enterprise's crew watched smoke rise from the horizon. Planes returned, some riddled with bullets, engines leaking, but victorious. Men collapsed on the deck, exhausted, covered in sweat, oil, and blood. The victory came at a cost. Aircrew lost, dozens. Aircraft destroyed. Enterprise itself unscathed. But every sailor knew how close they had come to annihilation. Enterprise had survived Pearl Harbor. She had struck the first blows at Tokyo. And now she had helped turn the tide of war at Midway. Yet the war was far from over. Enterprise continued to dominate the Pacific theater. The Solomon Islands campaign Guadalcanal became her proving ground. The Japanese launched kamikaze-like attacks, dive bombers, and torpedo planes. Enterprise dodged, countered, struck. Her air group became a phantom force, appearing where the enemy least expected. Enterprise's pilots struck islands, airfields, and ships with precision. Her deck crews worked tirelessly. Her gunners never rested. Every action reinforced her reputation as the indestructible carrier. By October 26, 1942, Enterprise participated in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, one of the most ferocious carrier engagements of the war. Japanese aircraft swarmed. Enterprise was hit. A bomb tore through her flight deck. Planes exploded on impact. Men were wounded, yet she did not sink. Her gunners fought back. Pilots took off from a battered deck. Enterprise's engineers kept her engines running despite smoke and fire. The Gray Ghost had taken hits that would have sunk lesser ships. But she sailed on. Her steel decks bore scars of battle. Her crews bore the weight of survival. Every strike she endured only strengthened her legend. USS Enterprise had survived Midway, Guadalcanal, and Santa Cruz. Her name was known across the Pacific. But the war still raged. Bigger battles, higher stakes, and even more daring missions lay ahead. By 1943, the Pacific was no longer an unknown ocean of fear, it had become a stage of relentless struggle. Enterprise, the Gray Ghost, moved like a shadow across it. She launched strikes on Tarawa, Macon, Gilbert Islands, and Kwajalein Atoll. Every mission tested her crew, her aircraft, her steel. The Japanese called her the ghost that would not die. In October 1944, Enterprise supported the Leyte Gulf operations, the largest naval battle in history. Bombs fell from the sky. Ships sank around her. Yet Enterprise endured. Her deck fired continuously. Her aircraft ascended without pause. No carrier had survived what she did. Her steel and her crew had become synonymous with perseverance, courage, and victory. Enterprise was hit, yes, multiple times, but never fatally. Aircraft crashes on deck, near misses from bombs, and shell fragments tearing through her hull. Each scar told a story. Each wound strengthened her legend. Her crew adapted. Engineers worked around the clock. Pilots flew through hell again and again. Every man knew that to falter was to die, and Enterprise refused to die. Enterprise became more than a ship. She became an idea, a promise that the United States would fight back, no matter the cost. Enterprise provided air support for Iwo Jima and Okinawa. She was a mobile fortress, launching planes that terrorized enemy positions while her gunners defended her with unrelenting precision. Even after nearly 4 years of war, Enterprise's decks were alive with life, hope, and steel resolve. Her name carried the courage of thousands. By September 2, 1945, Tokyo Bay, Enterprise anchored alongside other Allied vessels. The war had ended. Men walked her decks silently. Some stared at the horizon. Some touched the steel that had carried them through fire and death. Participated in 20 major engagements. Survived 7 bombing raids. Launched over 20,000 sorties. Earned 20 battle stars, more than any other U.S. ship. The Gray Ghost had lived when countless others had fallen. She had survived when others had not. She had carried hope across the Pacific. She had changed the course of history. Enterprise never returned to war. She was decommissioned in 1947. Her steel was eventually scrapped, yet her story endured. Ships are built of steel, rivets, and engines, but legends are built of courage, sacrifice, and the men who sail them. USS Enterprise, the Indestructible, the Gray Ghost. She lives forever, not just in history books, but in the hearts of all who understand the cost of freedom. When the world seemed darkest, one ship would not die, and in her shadow, a nation rose.